Good morning and welcome to AirSage Brewing Data. My name is Mark Forster and I'd like to thank you all for tuning in to learn more about data today. My name is Mark Forster. I'll be hosting the show today. And just a couple of words about myself. I'm the CEO of AirSage, founder of several startups in the mobile space, and therefore I'm honored to host the show today. Maybe to just give you a brief introduction about what we'll be covering today, we have a very distinguished guest whom I'm going to introduce very shortly, and we'll talk about public transit, efficiency of transportation, how communities should and can position themselves to benefit most from the infrastructure bill. It's a lot of interesting questions we'll cover today, so please stay tuned, and hopefully we'll have some time to field questions from the viewers today as well. With that, I'd like to switch over and introduce my guest. Today, we have Sharmila Mukherjee, EVP in Planning and Development for CAP Metro in Austin, Texas. So she'll be joining us, and she's responsible for shaping, defining, and advancing short and long-term transit programs and plays a key role in the creation of partnerships to guide transit solutions in Austin and the surrounding area. So I'm very excited to welcome Sharmila. Hi, Sharmila. Good morning.
Thank you, Mark. I
Great
appreciate being here.
Great to have you on the show. I know it's early, so let's get started with a couple of hot coffee questions.
Sure.
So obviously, one of the key topics these days is all around efficiency. Efficiency in transit is key, and obviously there are many ways of improving that. And I think one question I'd like to have for you is, what do you think should be done short, and what should be done long term to improve the situation in the country?
Thanks, Mark. You ask $1 million question, so I'm going to try to boil it down to bite-sized chunks. So planning for efficiency, and I think it ties really well with explaining big concepts in easy terms. Aside of major metro areas in the United States, leaving San Francisco, Chicago, and New York aside, there are so many other geographies, and I'm in Austin, Texas. Planning for large, high-capacity transit projects, it's a very interesting exercise, and we're in the middle of it. Austin passed Project Connect. It's a generational investment, $7 billion program to include light rail, Metro Rapid, which is our BRT, and then demand response. I will talk a little bit about that. So efficiency is, to me, it's kind of finding the right size solution in public transit for the constituency we are in. And I think in our case, a city that's exponentially growing and one of the fastest growing in the United States, it's mixing mobility solution, transportation solution to our demographics. So in cases where it needs essentially fixed guideway to move people faster, that's our solution. In neighborhoods where fixed route transit is not quite the right solution, we are going with demand response and pickup, and I'll talk about that during our interview.
Absolutely, that sounds great. And I mean, one of the challenges you just mentioned is actually the strong growth you've had in your capital area, because you have a lot of growth in the population and therefore changes in patterns. In which way has big data played a role in improving the situation and maybe also in guiding you in improving efficiency?
That's another great question. So regional travel demand forecasting model, which you may be well aware of, it has been the backbone of ridership forecasting, how large transit plans take place, even large transportation improvements take place all across the country. And it's in many situations that many geographies that I've worked in, I found regional travel demand forecasting to be probably one of the most complicated and demanding exercise at the same time. It takes into account like land use adopted forecasts, population demographics, feeds into this really robust model that gets updated every 5 years. So I think in an environment where a city is growing exponentially and There's this number that's floating out there, and it's verified by city data sources that 140 people are moving into Austin every day. Even if we take that or a reduced number as our baseline, we do not have that luxury of waiting 5 years for updated model or complicated sort of data manipulation that would take afterwards. So we would have to rely on big data and AI and IoT based sources to sort of supplement what we know comes out of our TSE based travel demand forecasting. So we would continue to rely on that and use that as a supplementary data sources.
Fantastic. So you're basically saying you have these supplementary data sources, and big data helps you and crunch that, because you have so many different sources today. You have the sensors which are built into the road networks, you have connected vehicle data, you have population movement data, and that helps you improve the data sets over time and get a more accurate view and more holistic view, essentially, on what is actually happening and how to prepare for that exponential growth, as you just mentioned. Now, in order to implement change, because obviously before implementing change, you need to review where do we stand. And typically that happens in a comprehensive review. And we spoke about that earlier before the show. And that can include environmental impact, economic impact, social impact being a very big topic these days. Think about what happens. Also, land use is one of those topics. What are some of the challenges you've experienced in your career?
So I would come up with the big three that are on my mind, and data's probably the third one. One of the first primary focus areas, and I think this infrastructure bill also focuses on that, it's sort of correcting past mistakes. Highways were built, as you know, in 1950s and 60s that raised neighborhoods, and the results and their land use plans that were put in place, there were unintended impacts from that. I think we have an opportunity now in transportation, both in decision making and in planning and execution, to correct some of the past mistakes and kind of reverse some of the unintended impacts and take it to a more level playing field for all of our customers. And how do we do that? So I think there are quite a few opportunities in this infrastructure bill. There's a new grant called Connecting Neighborhoods. It's reconnecting different parts of city that have been separated due to unintended impact, whether it's building of a highway or land use plans that caused segregation. I think using big data to understand the needs that exist that are not sometimes captured in a traditional either land use or transportation data, I think that would go a long way. The other piece that we are working on and we're very proud of, it's we're doing transit-oriented development planning and framework level analysis to go along with our transit plans. And in that, we're combining data with groundswell level public outreach. So kind of bringing the two input together, and equity is the big focus. We are trying to make sure that the way we use our data, way we present our information, there's transparency and equity in all of that. And I think big data democratizes some aspects of it. Depends on how it's used.
That's a great summary, but obviously, as you mentioned initially, you said this is a generational project. So this is probably, in many ways, the opportunity of a lifetime to correct for those effects which might have been unintended when the highways and roads were constructed in the 50s and 60s. And with that, indirectly, you're also mentioning that the micromobility and the choices are changing. There are more choices in transit than just a car. And that also leads to the topic of equity indirectly, that you're connecting, but also you're looking at options which need to be presented. And that maybe leads me to the next question, which is thinking about what you're mentioning about improving public transit and the bipartisan infrastructure bill, especially in areas like Austin, Texas, with exponential growth. that must have also some impact on prices, on housing prices, for instance, and therefore indirectly probably some impact on transportation. What do you see there as ways to improve the capacity of the networks? And there again, is it the data which makes a big difference? How do you reconnect? Is it the models? Can you say something about that, maybe?
Absolutely. And I think it kind of ties back to what I was alluding in my first response. I think given how land use in Austin is and very many other parts of United States and major metro and beyond, land use is fairly dispersed beyond our central core. So to provide mobility options and transportation choices that are going to be made available to our customers all over the city and in the suburbs, it really needs to be a package of solutions and no one size fits all. Cars are not going away. Providing public transit doesn't really mean it's penalizing roadway network or cars, but kind of take a holistic approach into transportation planning and seeing public transit and tying that to infrastructure builds, focus on climate resiliency and energy efficiency, bringing public transit in the mainstream of that mobility suite of options. And roadway networks will still need to be rebuilt. We need to start working very closely as partners with DOTs, as we do very well here in Texas. And then municipal planning organizations, MPOs, play a tremendous role. And we also have a great partnership here with Campo, our municipal MPO. And I think the way we would approach it, if we are to position a city, a county, or a region in a competitive manner and ask for greater share of federal funding, what would become most important is how we share data and how we collectively put our region forward and positioning agencies in a way that really is more future focused. And I think work is ongoing. We don't have a magic bullet, but at the same time, we don't have a silver bullet. We just need to prepare ourselves as we start to rebuild our transportation network, how we plan for them as we create a travel demand forecasting model and do an update on that, how we partner, how we approach that work together would really go a long way. But it really starts from all the way how we plan for projects, through how we come together in planning and designing it, through concept design, and then how we implement, keeping our end user in mind.
I like that you're putting the end user at the end of the day at the core because we're serving the people
Right.
and need to make sure that everyone has access. In that sense, we also saw, obviously not that recent, but we saw the development and rise of all those transportation network companies. I mean, the Ubers, the Lyfts, but also the Birds and those micro scooter, micro mobility companies popping up in many metropolitan areas in the country. And they are very price competitive.
They are.
How do you see them in the context that we just mentioned in planning? Because those are private entities which theoretically can do what they want.
Absolutely. It's a great question. Transportation network companies, Uber, Lyft, they will have their place. And their existence came out of an unmet need that existed. So that, to me, that this is how I view it. I believe that we really need to focus on our solution-driven approach. Uber and Lyft will exist, and at Cap Metro we have our demand response and innovative mobility is actually one of the most, I would say, have a very successful alternative to our what we call Metro Access. It's a demand response and innovative mobility solution. It started out as an experiment, almost like a pilot, to see how we would approach app-based demand response, and VIA provides solution to that. It's been very successful. It's zone-based, use similar app as Uber or Lyft. we also have a lot more transportation performance measures, and it's governed by a service framework that is not as rigid as you would have for a fixed service guidelines, but it almost a scaled down version of where sort of innovative mobility and demand response come together. So I only offer that as an example. We are not in competition with Uber and Lyft. Our service areas primarily within City of Austin, and we also contract our services with outlying areas. But in doing so, there are mobility gaps that exist and beyond our service area, and there are very many customer segments that are coming into our city every day. So I feel that the market for Uber and Lyft is separate from public transit, and and at the same time, in some cases, they offer a first and last mile solution. There's a lot to learn from where the gaps exist, rather than to go compete for that. So I believe that our demand response and metro access, which is via served app-based option, it's also increasingly popular. We have 9 zones, and we have a few more in planning. And the popularity is increasing as well. So all that tells me that instead of being in a competitive mode with TNCs, we really need to learn from how they operate, where we have an advantage in a segment that requires perhaps a little bit, a bit more helping hand. They probably need a little bit more security and insurance, and we operate in a different space. But jointly, we serve the needs, the mobility gaps that exist in a community. And then our fixed routes serve fast, reliable service for very specific reasons. So I think the segments are different, needs are different, and we don't need to compete on that.
Fantastic. So essentially you're saying it forced you, or it helped you go closer with the needs of those different mobility options, because obviously TNCs, as you said yourself, serve a certain part of the market, but the approach of app-based actually helps you with the travel demand response, and therefore complements the fixed route planning, and therefore you serve the needs better than before.
I absolutely agree with that. I also believe as we plan for our future facilities, we really need to think in terms of TNCs as a first and last mile that will exist for at least in the short term. I'm not sure what exactly, I don't have a crystal ball. I can't quite say what's going to happen when with the funding situation, or what happens with automated vehicles as they come into this space. But the way I see it, our needs are growing, and TNCs offer an option. We offer other very specific tailored transit options. And together, as with cars and bicycles, we forgot to talk about bicycles and micromobility. Also wanted to share something that I think would be very interesting to you. Transit agencies are not just doing bus and rail anymore. We are at Cap Metro, our CEO, under his guidance, and he's very innovative. We are in a great partnership with City of Austin and Cycle, and our Metro Bike expansion program is one of those examples that was featured in APTA as well as one of the successful micromobility. We are not the only one. There are other 8 transit agencies in the country that are thinking through some of these same ideas. But we really, that tells you, you asked about TNCs, but other modes of transportation are just that. They're different tools in a broader toolbox. So how we use them and how we use to support our customers' need is, I think, where our focus should lie.
So basically you're more diversified because you look at all these options and try to bring them together through data, essentially, to improve your models and therefore serve the needs better. And I think that's quite innovative. And with those cooperations you just mentioned with Cap Metro, I think that adds further value in learning. So that's great. Good. That's, I think, a good coverage of the questions we had for this first part. Now let's see whether they have any questions from the viewers. If you have any questions right now, let me just see. Let's see whether we have a question here. I see some things come in. Let me see which one we're going to pick. Hang on. Maybe we'll just take one question and then we'll announce the next installment, which is next week. Okay, question. Sharmila, how do you educate people with your app? Oh, the app-based demand response.
So we have, as a transit agency, this is one area I think we excel in. We have a fantastic customer experience and communications team that take opportunities at public meetings and through our local advocacy group. We essentially, Cap Metro, we have a routine educational campaign that we conduct, part of our project-specific public meetings, and through our travel trainings and workshops, we encourage, hey, here's our Cap Metro app. You go in, it's all integrated, whether you want to use our Metro Bike system or our fixed route, Metro Rail, or here's our pickup app. This is how you use it. And through app, actually to our questions at I would just say that we also monitor customer satisfaction through that app. So we have that advantage of sort of taking that information and use it to improve our zonal performance. As our pickup demand response zones are set, we fine tune the boundaries of the zone and tweak it to make sure that whatever customer is asking for, we are able to provide. So education, I guess, happens through travel training programs, through public meetings, and sort of other media that we use to promote.
And I think ultimately they will see the effect in the way you plan. So that's good news that you're using the data towards better servicing. Let's see. What's this? What is the financial ROI? Oh, that's a hard one. Do you want to take that or not? ROI of smart transportation network.
I don't have a good answer for that. I think it requires a conversation, and it depends on who you ask, which department would be giving you that response, and what exactly do you mean sort of in terms of the components of that smart transportation network. But what I could offer today, though, is it's an example of our great partnership with Austin Transportation Department. Rob Spiller is the director there. Campo, executive director Ashby Johnson, and we would be happy to come together and come up with a framework that we can agree upon, and then we'd be happy to provide sort of kind of an ROI discussion on that. But this is a little bit more involved than a LinkedIn Live discussion, but happy to take that forward.
I agree. I think that makes a lot of sense. I thought that was too hard. So, but at the end of the day, so what we can say is, since you have more data, you get more options, and you can serve mobility needs better. I think that's one takeaway here, which I definitely understand, and I think which the viewers are excited to hear. Any closing thoughts or?
Yes, I would just say that I think there's a whole lot to be explored with big data, beyond the buzzword and sort of what do we do with big data and IoT and whatnot in transportation space. We, in sort of very tangible way, trying to figure out a technology roadmap and see how we continue to use data beyond the traditional sources of travel demand forecasting, our onboard survey, which we use to understand and improve our existing service. But as I mentioned, they happen on a periodic basis, 2 to 5 years, and then that goes into a complex model that turns out information for us. And we rely heavily on data cleaning and very accurate answers. But our planning context is very agile, and it's becoming increasingly more so. So we see, and we're actively exploring this. Actually, I just came out of a meeting where we talked about what is our technology roadmap, how we are going to be using some of these information, smart data that's coming in. So it's not just data in, data out. We have an absorption process within our workforce. So I think that is one of our focus areas, and Cap Metro is one of the, I would like to say, one of the innovative agencies that, and our scale is such that we're able to experiment in agile, learn, and sort of fail fast, fix fast type of approach that we have that works. We're ripe for that type of engagement. That is what we like to do, and I think we are going to continue to experiment a little bit more with traditional data sources, supplementing that with big data, and figuring out how best, where to strike the balance, and how we use them in creating a complete trip for our customer. And that is where future lies for us.
I think many viewers will be excited to hear that, because ultimately this shows the way ahead for many agencies in how to use data to improve situations and gain in efficiency, especially in metropolitan areas. So this is fantastic. Well, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure, Sharmila. Thank you for being on the show. Before we leave, I'd like to also announce Cami Horn, which is VP of Development at Via Metropolitan Transit, San Antonio, Texas. She'll be joining us next week. And until then, I wish you a very nice day. And thank you for tuning in. Thanks, Sharmila. Thanks to all the viewers, and have a good day. Bye-bye.